Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon O'Loughlin. I am a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I am the CEO and attorney for the Association on American Indian Affairs. The association's the oldest nonprofit serving Native country, and we're presenting this wonderful pre-conference webinar with our friends from Colgate University and with our partner with the NAGPRA Community of Practice over there with Ann Amati at the University of Denver Museum of Anthropology. Thank you, Ann, and thank you, our friends at Colgate and Longyear Museum, who are going to be presenting in just a moment. But first, let me remind everyone that this is a webinar to get us all ready for the 9th annual repatriation conference. As you see on our screen, you can go to indian-affairs.org and click on events, and you can find out more information about our conference coming up November 7th, 8th, and 9th. It is taking place at Citizen Potawatomi Nation's Grand Resort and Casino in Shawnee, Oklahoma, but it's also hybrid. So it's coming virtually to you through Zoom. So you can register to attend with us in person. We're going to have a great time. We have a lot of events and networking, and of course, really good comprehensive training on NAGPRA and international repatriation. But if you're on Zoom, we'll have a lot of activities for you as well. And know that if you register either in person or virtually, you will have access to all the panels, all the sessions from the 3-day conference. So you can go back and review something you missed or remember something you forgot, and use these panel sessions as part of your continuing education for repatriation and NAGPRA practice. So I'm going to stop there with my marketing of the repatriation conference and stop sharing the screen. Look at all the wonderful people and faces out there. Welcome, everyone. So let me introduce you to our panel that's happening today. Folks from Colgate University and the Longyear Museum. Kelsey Olney-Wall is with us. She is the current NAGPRA assistant at the Longyear Museum of Anthropology. Along with Kelsey is Lisa Latocha, who's Wolf Clan from the Oneida Nation in New York. We also have Summer Fraser. She's with the Eel Clan Onondaga Nation, who's the curatorial assistant at Longyear. Rebecca Mendelson is with us, and she's the co-director of University Museums and the curator of the Longyear Museum of Anthropology. I think I've gotten all 4 of you. Did I accidentally miss someone from Colgate? Nope. Good. All right. So with that, I want to welcome everyone here and turn it over to Kelsey and our friends at Longyear and Colgate University. It's all yours.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Summer Fraser. Thank you to Shannon and Ann Amati for having us. Thank you, AAIA, for hosting the event. And thank everybody for being here and joining us today. Ungandena no what se dan de what daige what ayanta ungasta. Good afternoon. I am Summer Fraser, Assistant Curator at the Longyear Museum of Anthropology. I am from the Onondaga Nation and would like to start out by acknowledging that I am here today because of an Oneida woman, Gawistugis Lisa Latosha. Because of her, I am learning more and more every day about the Oneida and their beautiful lands. I am grateful for the experience and her continued presence at Colgate University. And now for our land acknowledgement. The Longyear Museum of Anthropology at Colgate University recognizes our collective responsibility to acknowledge our colonial history. Our campus sits on the traditional lands of the Aga, known as the people of the upright stone, and Oneida Indian Nation of New York. The museum is actively committed to building relationships with the Oneida people and with other Native American tribes and nations. It is urgent that we consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together today. I'd like to introduce our team once again. Lisa Latosha is Wolf Clan from Oneida Indian Nation. She is our community liaison and the spark that revitalized efforts to continue the repatriation work at Longyear. Kelsey Only Wall is our repatriation manager. She ensures Longyear complies with NAGPRA and is accountable to the Indigenous communities and their belongings. Rebecca Mendelson is the curator of the Longyear Museum of Anthropology and co-director of University Museums at Colgate University. She is an advocate for community collaboration as an approach to decolonizing museums. I am Ilklan Onondaga Nation. I am also the curatorial assistant, and I contribute to the overall productivity of the team. I also want to give a shout out to Susanna White, show her some love. She is the head of collections for University Museums at Colgate. She deserves acknowledgement for her role in supporting our work through collection inventories and database management. Kelsey will talk about where we are with NAGPRA compliance.
Hello, everyone. Again, thank you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I want to start off today with complete transparency on where we are with our NAGPRA compliance. Although there have been multiple repatriations in the past, the Longyear Museum still has ancestors and belongings that fall into NAGPRA in our care. Like many university museums and institutions, there was a lack of dedicated staff that was a detriment to our compliance with NAGPRA. It really wasn't until Lisa Latosha was hired in 2018 that our NAGPRA work picked up considerably, and we really have her to thank for that. As you can see with the list of our current work, we're making progress thanks to the National NAGPRA program support with the consultation and documentation grant that gave me the opportunity to have this position and be with everyone here today, and our amazing team. We've held 22 consultations just this year so far, but we also have to acknowledge that there's still a considerable amount of work that needs to be done. While assessing the museum's NAGPRA compliance last year, we discovered there was a teaching collection of human remains that had never been fully reviewed to determine whether or not the collection fell under NAGPRA. Last August, we oversaw a non-invasive osteological analysis, and with the final report, we learned that we have an additional 23 ancestors in our care. The number is much higher than the 2 we have listed on the NAGPRA inventories database. These ancestors have been here since the 1940s, but I'm happy to say that as of today, we're holding consultations for all of them, and I'm working on multiple notices of inventory completion. We also still have an estimated number of 21,859 belongings, 14 open NAGPRA cases that we're managing, and 6 that need to be reopened. And NAGPRA summaries need to be developed for some regions across the US. So with the next slide, you can see that we wanted to give an approximate number of the belongings by state and break that down a little bit more than just giving you that broad, extremely large number of 21,859. It's important to note that we fully recognize ancestral territories are not limited to the boundaries of states, but this is just how the items and belongings are listed in our collections database. As you can see, over 17,000 of them originate from New York State. So we work very closely with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Haudenosaunee Standing Committee to make sure that we return those belongings as expeditiously as we can. Unfortunately, what's not on this list is an additional 3,500 belongings that only have either regional locations or they're just listed from the United States. Their geographical information still needs to be determined through consultation. We look forward to working with the nations as we continue with our NAGPRA compliance to return as many, if not all, of these belongings home. And we will be at the NAGPRA conference in November, so we're happy to meet with anyone that has not received information yet, or as we're trying to work towards that, or needs more information from us. What was once a minimal effort to attempt compliance with a heavy focus on teaching and collections, we really wanted to revise and center the needs of Indigenous communities. We know that we still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of belongings in our care, but we wanted to change our focus to NAGPRA, and my colleague Lisa will go into more detail on how we build these genuine and transparent relationships.
So Lisa's been feeling a little bit under the weather. So Summer is going to take a couple of these slides for her today, but please know that a lot of this work is done by Lisa, and we are super grateful for all of her effort.
Thank you. What we try to focus on is building genuine and transparent relationships with Native nations. A lot of the time, making that first phone call is a vital first step. Even if you can't get through the first time, you have to keep trying, because making that personal connection will actually lead to better things in the future. Be honest about the history of your museum and where you are in terms of NAGPRA. Being honest is something that the Native nations can see immediately. You have to acknowledge the hardships as well as it's not good information. I can't say that, but you do have to be honest and take any kind of slack that they might give you, and learn to move on from it. Learn from your mistakes. Learn from the mistakes before you. Be present with the local community you are working with as often as possible. In this picture, you know, we've taken staff members and students down to the Oneida Nation Festival. They got to know what it's like to experience the culture. They're not just some other people that are unknown. They're people who have friends and family. There are people who want to share and celebrate. So making that step to go out and to understand these people who you are talking to builds a connection. Know who to ask when you are talking with Native nations, because if you are just asking some random person, you might not get accurate information. Reach out to the list of people on the NAGPRA list. You will find that they will tell you who to talk to. Lisa has connections within the Haudenosaunee Nation. I have connections within the Haudenosaunee Nation. We're able to call them, email them, talk to them in person, let them know that there's something coming from Colgate. And it's very helpful to taking the next steps to consultation. Here at the New York, we're pretty much located in the center of New York State. Most of our repatriated material comes from the Oneida Indian Nation. We decided to focus most of our efforts in returning these items to Oneida and to all the other Haudenosaunee people. It's quite an effort, but you have to start somewhere and move your way out. Building these relationships here will only make the college stronger. It'll make the Haudenosaunee stronger. They'll get back part of their identity.
So this is a slide I'm going to take on behalf of Lisa, but I wanted to share that this is one of those places that it's been really phenomenal to have a community liaison on the team, someone to kind of help us understand the cultural nuances and things that as someone who came up through academia might not always be obvious to me. So here are some tips from Lisa on how to be diplomatic in Indian country. So this includes first understanding the traditional unceded territory that you are on. That's always really important at all times. And know the true history of the nation on whose land you work. So that's really important as well. And understanding that this history may or may not be written in history books, talking to people, respecting oral traditions is incredibly important as well. Understanding that there are protocols when you're working with sovereign nations, and respecting nation-to-nation relationships is extremely important. Understanding, there are nuances to this and understanding who to ask. All of these things are really wonderful, again, to have a community liaison because we can ask Lisa her advice at all times. Summer provides wonderful advice as well on some of these questions. And the goals and the values of the museum really need to be redefined to center the wants and needs of the nations, right? I mean, this may or may not pertain to NAGPRA, depending on the way that we're doing things, but especially when we're doing NAGPRA, this is deeply important. And understanding respectful language, right? I mean, I think this is not something else that Lisa does a wonderful job of. And as someone with a background in communications, she's also particularly well suited to help us with this, making sure that we are very careful with our language and try to use words that are not quite as triggering during a process that's already really difficult for everybody involved.
So when it comes to building these relationships with sovereign nations, there's this idea of going above and beyond when it comes to NAGPRA. We all know that NAGPRA is federal law and kind of the bare minimum and the floor. So when we want to go above and beyond, it can break down in two ways. The ways in which we prioritize the needs of the nation, the bands, nations, and tribes that we're working with, and ways where intentionally or unintentionally, it can really kind of stall the NAGPRA process as you're working through it. So for us, when it comes to prioritizing the needs as we're building these genuine and transparent relationships, we only do what's asked of us. So extensive research only happens when it's explicitly requested. At the Longyear Museum, we prioritize NAGPRA cases in particular by the severity of human rights violations. Ancestors are obviously the most important and need to be returned first as their journey has been interrupted. So when we were asked to continue the research on these ancestors to find more information about them, we looked through everything. I went to the Smithsonian archives. We really continued based on the request from the nations we were working with. But the moment that they asked us to stop, we stopped. We also created a consultations module that stemmed from a request to have collections records be more accessible. We also had to understand and make sure that the nations we were working with were in lockstep with us the entire way to cover all of the restrictions that may be necessary as well. Anything the nation wants, we want to fulfill their requests. Band, nation, tribe, we want to make sure that these sovereign nations' requests are not only heard, but we comply and we prioritize them as best as we can. It's really our responsibility as we care for their belongings and ancestors until they return home to learn the traditional and cultural protocols of our partners, to not misstep or cause additional harm with the tribal nation representatives, leadership, and even especially the community members. I always ask if there are any traditional or cultural protocols they'd like us to take in order to care for the ancestors and the belongings as best we can. Obviously, there are moments where I can't do that, but we do our best to accommodate them and bring other members of the community in to fulfill those requests with their permission, of course, but really prioritize that they know that we want to take care of everything in our care until they return home. We also, in our idea of going above and beyond, we repatriate corresponding images along with the physical belongings. While the deaccession records stay in our database, the images are permanently deleted from our servers unless otherwise requested. And we always try to offer multiple options for the repatriation and physical transfer, whether that's having the repatriation here at Colgate or on their land, whether it's big or it's small. We want to make sure we offer as much support and cover as many of the costs as we can. And so when we go above and beyond, it can also sometimes be it can also stall the process entirely. So, and it can be counterproductive. For example, within our own institution previously, staff had to write an entire multiple-page report to justify the repatriation of a belonging rather than using the information gathered through consultation. We can all agree that that is an unnecessary step that was taken, and we obviously no longer need those reports written. Like I said before, doing that extensive research, unless it's explicitly asked of us, we give them as much information as we can and that we have, and it's their choice whether or not they'd like us to continue with that. And this one, we have to check ourselves all of the time. I know that we want to make sure that we give the sovereign nations we're working with as much information as possible, but at times we can over course correct and give too much information before asking them what they want and need first. So whenever we make that first phone call, I always want to make sure that I ask them how they would like their information to be sent to them, in what ways they would like it to be sent to them, so they have the access that they need to get that information as easily as possible, whether it's mail, email, and mailing a thumb drive along with the paper copy, creating a OneDrive or a Dropbox, all of the above. We want to make sure that they have access to all the information that they want without giving them an overwhelming amount right from the beginning.
So this is another Lisa slide. In terms of thinking about building a new fire, when we build a new fire, we have to bring new ideas and new people to watch that fire. So helpers are brought in to keep the embers from extinguishing. And so by exposing individuals like Kelsey and myself to communities, we see everyone as thriving people, friends, collaborators, and not static representations that might be seen behind glass in a museum vitrine. And so in making these relationships and these friendships and growing them through time, we shift from allies to accomplices is Lisa's way of thinking about it. And so one example of this is, in terms of going above and beyond, the NAGPRA work at our institution is working with Oneida Indian Nation in their Youth Work Learn program. So for the last 3 years, we've hosted Oneida middle school age students here on campus, and the program's evolved as we've learned the wants and needs of the students and the program managers. And this is kind of the highlight of our summer, is bringing students around campus to see not just the museum, but also our visualization lab here on campus, the community garden, which now has a Three Sisters Garden collaborative element to it as well. And so that's one of the small ways that we're incorporating community collaboration into our broader work here at the institution beyond NAGPRA. But at the end of the day, we're here to talk about NAGPRA. And I think it's really important to make that a priority at all times, right? I think we all know museums and institutions where this hasn't been the case for many, many years. More than 30 years later, many institutions are still not in compliance with NAGPRA. And so my role as the leader of this team in some form in terms of the institutional hierarchy is really to set the conditions for the success for this team and to clear the path for them to do the really wonderful work that they do. So early on, it became apparent. I came on to Colgate University at 2020, and it became really clear very quickly that we still had a lot of work to do in this area. And so, step one was kind of figuring out exactly how we can build the capacity to do that work. So like many institutions, we have a relatively small staff. It has grown to the size that you see here. And we work as part of our structure also with a shared team of university museum staff who work for both the Longyear Museum of Anthropology and the Picker Art Gallery. So we have kind of a joint anthropology art group that work together with us. And we're so grateful for the support of our colleagues on these projects and other projects. But it became really important to kind of build out the Longyear specific staff working on NAGPRA as well. And so one path that we took to do this that I put forth as a possible pathway for other university museums and institutions as well, is we were really fortunate to start with a grant through the National NAGPRA program. So we received funding for a consultation documentation grant. And I wanted to thank folks in the repatriation conferences, the community of practice. I think we've learned from other institutions along the way what types of applications are likely to be successful to support this work. And so talking to other people about what's worked for them was something that we were really grateful for. So talk to your peer institutions. In terms of the grant writing, we had a lot of support from our grants office, but I especially would like to give a shout out to Oneida Indian Nation for supporting our request. I truly believe we could not have been successful in receiving funding that ultimately led to the hire of Kelsey Olney-Wall for 2 years without their support. And for what it's worth, I mean, I think that was another way that we showed collaboration. At the same time, we applied for funding from the National NAGPRA program. Oneida Indian Nation did too, and we wrote a letter to support them as well. And it was really lovely to see that both of those applications in 2021 both got funded, and both groups were able to kind of expand our capacity to do this work together. So I think that's another example of a really strong partnership that we've been grateful to have. And in terms of building the capacity for this work, we started with the grant. Kelsey came on with us as a NAGPRA assistant for 2 years. And during that time, we were able to document very clearly all of the work that we have ahead of us, right? We kind of set a roadmap for NAGPRA and both, discovered all the places that we have work to do and started to figure out how we might prioritize that work together as a team. And with that plan in hand, we were able to go to the administration and say, listen, this is way more work than we're going to be able to do in 2 years with National NAGPRA support. What institutional resources do we have to support this work? And we were really happy that we were able to leverage this grant into 3 years of support from the institution. Very grateful to the Provost and Dean of Faculty Office and the President's Office for, making a special case to support the role of Kelsey Olney-Wall, not just as NAGPRA assistant, but a promotion to repatriation manager for the next 3 years. So this is one case where we were actually able to leverage the work that we did during the grant to get support from our own institution. So we're very grateful for that. As a director, it's also really important that we prioritize budget for doing NAGPRA work. This is one place where we are quite privileged as a private institution, but earmarking funds for travel related to NAGPRA, professional development for our staff, any supplies that might be needed for cultural care requests, and everything in between, right? Rehousing that might be needed. So slowly but surely, we've been using the budget that we prioritize for NAGPRA, putting it to good use there. And I think, another thing that's been really important for us is to scale back in other areas, right? As a small team, we wear many, many hats. And I think one of the things that we found, as did faculty members who did this work before us, is that it's really hard to do this work on top of other responsibilities, especially teaching, right? So as a teaching museum, we are often called in to teach classes for lots of faculty and students, and that's really wonderful. We love that part of our work, but it also means we have a really serious responsibility to pay attention to what we're bringing into the classroom. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons in that area. So in addition to kind of being more intentional with the teaching that we do with our collections, we had a moment where we said, listen, you know, we are being called in to do so many great things across campus that are really wonderful, but they do take away from these other projects that we're doing, including NAGPRA. And so we made the decision, and we garnered support from the administration to scale back a little bit this semester, and we actually decided to close the gallery altogether. So that's something that maybe not all museums would do, but I think it really has allowed us to dive deep into this work and continue to do as much as we can as quickly as possible, because this work is important to us. And I think closing the gallery is one way we show that value. And it's been really lovely to see all the support for that decision. You know, the students have been really behind us. A lot of people have said nice things on social media. We haven't gotten any kinds of objections from the Board of Trustees or anyone else. So for those of you who have thought about doing this but wondered what the response might be, it's been overwhelmingly positive in our experience. I think hiring and training is also something that is quite important. And this is something that I think has been really a strength of this team as well. You know, including multiple voices on hiring committees and hiring people with the right skills is super important. And I think we have another slide on that in just a moment. But also rethinking the academic hierarchy. I think this is something that, you know, especially working at an academic institution is very much embedded in the culture here, and is one of the things that we grapple with. But just acknowledging, you know, the idea of who has expertise. It may not always be the person with the PhD in the room. So of this group, I am that person, but it, you know, I think it's become really important for me to kind of cede my authority sometimes. And I deeply respect the team that we put together, and I'm super grateful for everyone's contributions. And I mean, everyone really does bring strengths. And I hope our first slide kind of showed exactly what those are, and all those different ways that we came to approach this work, and the value that comes from that. And so bringing this team together when you know, I'm asked to teach classes on NAGPRA, we now do it as a panel style, so that people hear from all of us and we make decisions together. And I'll talk a little bit more about dealing with roadblocks as well. So in terms of the hiring, I think building your team is super important, especially if you're at a moment where you might be scaling up. You got a new grant, or, you know, your institution has provided funds for this. I think for us, this was a really critical moment in making decisions about what it is that we wanted for the team that we were building. And so I already kind of mentioned different lived experiences and skills are equal to academic achievements. This is something that I understand is often revolutionary in academia. I guess I can attribute my early experiences as an intern at the National Museum of the American Indian for seeing firsthand, like, things don't need to be that way. And it's actually quite successful when we invite people with traditional knowledge into these spaces and just listen, right? So I think in looking for a NAGPRA assistant at the time, now repatriation manager, some of the things that we were looking for were someone who can connect with diverse groups and communities, someone who clearly cares about the work and isn't just doing it for academic accolades or their professional ego. And in that case, the soft skills are really just as important as the academic skills. So we were looking for things like emotional intelligence, patience, transparency, and honesty. And, you know, I think when I think back to the interviews, I think one of the questions the search committee had that for me was the most telling was, tell us about a situation that you had to speak up and be assertive to get a point across that was important to you. That question and the answers that we got during the interview process was something that really showed who thought about NAGPRA as a human rights issue, and in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think prioritizing people who see that work as hugely important became deeply important to everyone on the committee. And I think has really worked to help shape the team that we have today. So that's kind of my advice. I mean, a lot of the academic pieces, the NAGPRA specific stuff, that training can happen after the fact or just in advance. Here's one really great place to plug once again, the AAI repatriation conferences, because everyone on our team has been to one or more than one, and we've learned so much. Also, the shout out to the community of practice, because we've learned a lot from those folks as well. I've also asked team members, not just our team, but also our broader university museums team, to do cultural competency trainings. And I know these are some things that Kelsey, as someone who was interested in applying to these types of jobs, did before she even started working with us here at Colgate. So I don't know, Kelsey, if you'd like to mention anything about that.
Sure. Yeah. I was able to show interest in this position before the grant was even given to Colgate, knowing the previous curatorial assistant, Caitlin Lynch. And she, just in talking and learning more about me and my interest in this role and doing NAGPRA work with the background that I have in antiquities trafficking and art crime and repatriation, that to even really be considered, she wanted to make sure that I understood going to the AAIA repatriation conference and going and, you know, really prioritizing NAGPRA work on my own and being passionate about working with communities, and was number one to even apply for it. So I kind of hold that standard very highly and very close to my heart, because I was already passionate about it, but it really showed when I was in the interview process that I took the initiative to take that on, because I wanted to do it myself. It wasn't just another job. It was something that I really hold dearly and care about very much. So I also wanted to say that as a part of this webinar, we did kind of create a list of interview questions that we would be happy to share with anybody after the fact, because I know with the new NAGPRA regulations changing, there probably is going to be a lot of upscaling in roles and additional roles being granted to other institutions. So if it can help in any way, we definitely want to give some extra information that we can.
So this work, of course, isn't without the occasional roadblock, right? And so I think, you know, we've also gained strategies in working with different constituencies inside our institution for the most part. And I think above all is just reminding people that NAGPRA is legal compliance work, right? It's human rights work, it's legal compliance work, and it's not a want to, not a when you get around to it. It's a we need to do this and we need to do it now, right? And that's where, you know, the reprioritization comes in. Working with different institutional structures, you know, these things, the way that these systems are set in place aren't always geared with collaboration in mind. And for example, there have been delays in getting collaborators funds and things like that, just because of the specific paperwork required. So I think we've kind of learned how to expedite things a little bit more, or work around systems, or set expectations, right, for what might be coming. But, you know, I think we've found that, you know, a lot of things that seemed like really serious barriers along the way are things that can be resolved if you just find the right person and ask the right question. So I think we have another example of that further on, but just kind of mentioning, like, having a can-do attitude when it comes to these collaborations and requests that we get, it goes a long way. And I think more often than not, we're able to accommodate as best we can. When it comes to dealing with roadblocks, I wanted to give a plug for a resource that I found unbelievably valuable, and that is a doc from the 2020 Repatriation Conference that was happening virtually. This was a really amazing session that was done by Ray Gould and Kathy Fine-Dare and many other contributors. I apologize, I feel like there was one more presenter there that I'm forgetting. But this was the net result of the conversation of that workshop was that they created a document called Creating Reciprocal Avenues, and it's designed as a tool to be shared. And we do share it with both students, with administrators, and essentially it's a lot of discussion about what NAGPRA looks like on the ground. You know, the on the ground reality, the barriers that lots of people across institutions face. And it's been a really helpful tool to show that, like, these aren't things that are specific to Colgate. These are things that happen at a lot of different institutions. And in fact, these are things that we can predict might be barriers along the way. So what can we do to kind of start to clear the path before we get into these situations? And to that point, I think education has been really critical, right? A little bit goes a long way in this department. And so, you know, educating administrators about what NAGPRA compliance means and what it looks like, educating even the Board of Trustees a little bit more about what this work is and why it's so important to us. Our staff, we've done cultural competency training, as I mentioned, including this amazing presentation by Pete Hill of Native American Community Services of Western New York. And students, right? I mean, I think that's another place that we're poised to kind of train the next generation of advocates for this work along the way. This has also kind of been a part of our strategic initiatives, both at the university museums level and beyond. And I think that has been really helpful too, to kind of always point back to the plan and say, like, listen, no, this is part of what we do here. Yes, I'm sure we can share that with you after this. Yes, and also just tapping into people's humanity, right? We recognize that NAGPRA work is about human rights violations, right? And kind of getting people to see it from that frame rather than as research or as, you know, something that we do because we have to, but we do it because it's right. And so these are some of the lessons that, you know, when I talk to people from students to the Board of Trustees and everywhere between, these are some of the things that come up quite often. The reminder that NAGPRA is a human rights law and not a research project. You know, we discuss sometimes that we can't always talk about NAGPRA, right? We go with the wishes of the bands, tribes, and nations that we work with in this department. Some like to be very public, especially when we're doing repatriation events. Others like to be much more private, and we try to be really careful with what we share and what we don't share. And we don't involve students in this work only in the types of trainings. For example, we're going to do a viewing party of the repatriation conference with our students as one of the few opportunities they get to learn how to do this work and hear from the experts in this, right? And on that point, rethinking who has expertise, right? It's not always the person with the PhD. Oftentimes it's faith keepers, it's people with traditional knowledge. And we're always so grateful anytime that they share what they know with us. So I think we've already talked a little bit about language. We have developed a respectful language list based on some things that we've seen some other institutions develop. And that is based on conversations we've had along the way. And we use that as part of training our interns, students, and everyone else on our staff and beyond. Rethinking the concept of ownership is also really important, right? I mean, I think this is something that museums and professors think about all the time. Yes, we can absolutely share that list with you all. We'd be very happy to share that. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of places there's this idea that belongings are property, and you know, yeah, really important heritage of the institution or something that, you know, gets accounted for in terms of like the property logs and things like that. And kind of changing the frame to think that, you know, these are belongings that really shouldn't have ever been here in the first place. Our God forbid ancestors being treated like they are belongings, right? All of these ancestors and belongings need to go home, and we should have never had them here in the first place. They're really not ours. And so making sure that everyone understands exactly what that means and how that plays a role in all of the different museum care policies and procedures that we develop. So we've developed a lot of these things as we go along, based on conversations and collaborations we've been doing for ongoing NAGPRA cases. We're currently in the process of kind of formalizing these into some of our policies as well, so that these are things that will continue to be done in perpetuity. So I'm just going to go through this super quick, but just to show that, you know, in 2020, we did a strategic planning process. Everyone on the team was involved, and including all the multiple voices. So Kelsey and Summer weren't here yet, but Lisa was heavily involved. Our last curatorial assistant, Caitlin Lynch, was also very involved with this. And I think it shows, right? A number of our 6 goals do speak to NAGPRA in some form or another. Including, you know, goal number 1, above all, investing in diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, and decolonization in all of the work that we do. We also educate students about the work that we do with NAGPRA, even if we don't include them in the actual process without explicit permission, which has not happened yet. And Summer, can you flip? Some of the other things, like being deliberate in the way we build and maintain the collections to support our missions, right? This includes not collecting things that might be subject to NAGPRA in the first place. So when these requests come our way, we tend to filter them to the correct nation, and let people know, like, hey, this is a collection you might be interested in, or convince the donors, like, oh, I think the right place for this is, you know, with the nation of origin, and directing them in that department. And then, you know, in terms of the strategic plan at the university level too, I mean, I think a number of the strategies and talking points that have worked for us in terms of convincing everyone that this is great for everyone, right? The work that we do with NAGPRA and the collaborations we develop lead to improved relationships with Indigenous communities locally and beyond. Collaborations that might include speakers, artists in residence, longer term programs, and cultural festivals. And this is perhaps a really good moment to plug, for those of you who might be local to New York, that we have an Indigenous Nations Festival coming up this Saturday, and it's free and open to the public, and we'd love to have you join us in our Sanford Field House. This is something Lisa and a group of Indigenous students and staff and faculty have been working really hard to bring together. So that's something that I think the university is really excited about as it relates to our broader diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And you know, all of the work that we do kind of helps us understand one another and do better to create the diverse community that we hope to see on our campus. So there's a lot of widespread support for that right now, and it's really easy to point to NAGPRA as an origin for a lot of that. And so this is another one, you know, Lisa's done a ton of work in this area as well. You know, moving us from allies to accomplices and growing a community of support within the institution. Again, this is all kind of above and beyond the NAGPRA process itself, but you know, things like removing images from circulation where that might be the case. So early on in my looking into our NAGPRA compliance, I went down to our special collections and university archives and found an example of an image of an ancestor there. And policies down there, or anyone can come down and take pictures of the folders they look at. So, I spoke to the staff there and said, hey, if this were our collection, we would restrict this image. Would you be comfortable with us doing that? And, all it took was a question, and they were very supportive, especially when you explain the why. And in the end, I was able to leave with that image and put it in our restricted NAGPRA folder, so that we can remutate that image as well, when the time is right. So I think talking to people about these types of things and tapping into other places where good DEI work is happening on campuses, our Office of Equity and Diversity and other working groups around campus have provided some really strong allies for us in doing this work along the way. Oh, you want to go back one, Summer? Kelsey, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. As Becky spoke about special collections, another really great partnership that we have is with the art history department here at Colgate, where after meeting with Lisa at a DEAI training, the art history department actually voluntarily approached her and our team to help remove and deaccession images from their database that depict culturally significant, culturally sensitive belongings, and even some casts of ancestors that may fall under NAGPRA. So with these trainings around campus, it's been really, really wonderful. Teams voluntarily coming up to us going, we definitely don't want to perpetuate showing harmful images. So what can we do to work together to make sure that we go through the images with you and we remove them? And then when you're in consultation, you can let us to be, re-uploaded back into the database or just deaccessioned entirely. So it's been a really amazing project that we've worked on with Leslie Chapman. It's been so amazing with this work to just make sure that our policies of sensitive images and not perpetuating that harm are kind of seen throughout different departments within the university, that where those images have been circulated in the past, and they wanted to take the initiative to voluntarily make sure that didn't continue to happen. So it's been really awesome with the art history department. Another thing with working in a different department is reach out to your local or your institutional fire safety director. We reached out to him and wanted to make sure that any, cultural practices that any nation wanted to take during a consultation could happen. And he was very much on board with making sure that the, fire alarms could be turned off, the sensors could be turned off, so our collection spaces could be used by the communities that we work with in the way that they need. And nobody had ever really asked before, so he was very much happy to oblige. And as long as we give him a couple weeks notice, it's been really great to work with campus safety and the fire director here to intensively cover what we can during consultation. And Summer, I can take the last one if you'd like. This work is really hard. As NAGPRA practitioners, it's very emotional, and there are really, really hard days. So we always try to take time and, refresh the spirit by grabbing a smoothie or some kind of treat during the really hard days, and just be with each other and just support each other. We want to prioritize. That's another thing to kind of make sure that we all are ready and can do this work. You can't help others when your cup is half empty. So we really try to make sure that all of us feel supported and cared for. And patience is a big thing. It's it's not a quick process. We don't want it to be a quick process. We want to be thorough. I saw some comments in the chat about federally recognized and non-federally recognized. We do work with all of the nations that we can, ancestors in our care. We want to make sure that everyone can be contacted, and we don't leave anyone out. Everyone's voice is really important in this process. But it does take time. We know it takes time to do this right. And above all else, questions, whether it's the community members, tribal nation leadership, TIPOs, whoever you're working with, ask the questions within your administration and your facilities team and other staff, if there can be extra funds for paying for supplies, for repatriation, paying for the catering, consultation stipend. It's always best to ask, because then you can figure out, where you need to pivot to apply for it. We've gotten so much support from not only our administration, our other members of the team, and other staff from different departments to support us with this work. But most of the time, a lot of people really want to help with this. It's garnered a lot of so. And finally, we have our contact information. Yes, travel assistance as well. I see that I don't see the whole comment, but I do see that. Yeah, we cover mileage, especially when within the small, when working, especially with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but we do our best to support wherever we can with costs. And with our contact information, please feel free to call or email. We're happy to, and Summer and I will be in person at the NAGPRA repatriation the AAIA repatriation conference in November. So feel free to, we'll probably try and talk to Shannon to get a table or something, or reserve some meeting room so we can meet with whoever we can. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to be with us this afternoon and hear a little bit about how we try to approach NAGPRA. So if you have any questions, please ask away.
Ooh, let's give all of our wonderful presenters from Colgate a round of maybe some snaps or something. Maybe some uplifted thoughts, some waves, some hearts. Thank you so much, all of you. Kelsey, Lisa, hope you're feeling better. Summer, everyone, we're seeing some hands raised, and so let me get started for everyone. Let's go first with Cliff Parkinson. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. My name's Cliff Parkinson. As you can see, I'm at Utah State University, and I've heard a lot of, in addition to next month's conference, I've heard mentioned throughout this of cultural competency courses and trainings, and I'm curious if there are any well-known kind of national resources that that those of us who are interested in taking those can and getting involved in those can reach out to and point our fellow workers in this space to, because I think we all recognize it's a huge deal. By the way, fantastic presentation. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say, Lisa's given us some really good advice in this area. And in terms of the cultural competency, we have worked with Pete Hill at Native American Community Services of Western New York. So we can recommend him quite highly in the organization as a whole. So they've been really wonderful. We often tell our students and other people we work with to follow the AAIA on social media. I mean, I think that's a really good way to kind of learn about like what's important in Indian country. And a lot of this important work. I'm sure there are tons of others on this call who have great resources for this too. So I mean, please feel free to crowdsource this through the chat. Yes.
Yeah, the Association on American Indian Affairs can actually provide that type of training or specific training to your needs at your institution if that's what you're looking for. So as a nonprofit, we can do it for the low price of something that's reasonable, right? So we'd be happy to help and support. Your
Wonderful,
growth and
thank
education.
you.
Thank you, Cliff. Who else has their hand raised? There were a whole bunch of hands. Where did they all go? There's Gracie. Gracie, you want to unmute?
Hi, I'm Gracie Tully from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. So Marley, my question is, with among of other niches going on at the museum, I'm new to this role, as well as NAGPRA in general. So my question was really on starting on preparing summaries. Since our collection's kind of pretty broad, for at least here in the United States, what would you suggest about kind of getting started with that?
I guess from my perspective, I would say, look for resources. I think there's tons of trainings through the community of practice and the repatriation conference that'll kind of help point you in the right direction. So that's kind of like step one, I would say. In terms of how we have approached this in terms of like prioritization, I think we've thought about it in two different ways. One is kind of scouting for the worst human rights abuses and really prioritizing those cases and making sure that those bands, tribes, and nations know if we have ancestors or belongings from those regions in our collection. And the other thing that we've done based on Lisa's recommendations is kind of start local, right? And work our way out, right? It's really important that we have good, solid relationships with the nations on whose land we're on and nearby. And so I think that is one way we have approached phasing out this work that we have ahead of us.
Anyone else from Colgate wanted to respond?
Sure, I can. We noticed from the previous summaries that were written and sent out that there was a very overwhelming and convoluted amount of information. And it was not even very clear for me reading it. So I was like, this is not going to be helpful sending this kind of, throwing spaghetti at the wall together. So we took the old summaries that we had and really rewrote the format of them entirely to highlight the belongings that, whether they were unassociated funerary belongings or ones that seemed very sacred, and bolded those and broke it out by collection as well. And then sent those out to make it along with packages lists of the items in a way that makes clearer and kind of highlight the most important information was the way that we wanted to do that.
And also consider, we're going to have new NAGPRA regulations very soon. And the method in which summaries are looked at is going to be a little bit different. And let me point to directly, I think what's going to be important is that museums are going to need to defer to Native nations about what they say their objects of cultural patrimony, their sacred objects, and their associated funerary objects are, or unassociated funerary objects. So looking at what the new regulations are going to give us, I would strongly advise, if you're redoing your summaries, that you provide all the information you can provided in a way that's geographically organized, potentially, so that you can tailor the information that you're sending to certain groups of nations that you're going to want to consult with, and let them lead the process, right? I think a lot of what we heard from Colgate today was to not assume and to not be the primary decision maker, but do your best to defer to Native nations. And the new NAGPRA regulations are, we believe, going to require that as well. So feel free to add on to that, but I see a couple more hands raised.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon, sorry for interrupting you.
You're cutting in and out a little bit, Kelsey.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. We also include any ethnographic items. So we want to make sure that the scope geographically and by collection includes archaeological, ethnographic. We don't want to leave anything out that may have been purchased later on, or seems contemporary to us. We want to make sure that they have a comprehensive understanding of everything that we hold in our collection. But within the summaries, we try to like not, post a bullet point list of everything, but just that they can flip to the list of summaries that's connected to the list that's connected within the summary to read and let us know and let them lead with that information.
Summaries are going to be the next big thing that we've got to get through. Hey, Tony, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to ask a question? So far, I don't think we can hear you, Tony. I see that you're unmuted. You may need to check which mic you're using. Well, Tony, while you're working on that, we'll go to Helena, if that's okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Helena.
Okay. Yeah, so this past summer, I actually returned a handful, actually a lot of my ancestors through the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian doesn't fall under NAGPRA, but I did want to share with Robert Rosa that I'm an unrecognized tribe. And I hope that universities there's actually 400 unrecognized tribes. It's 69% of tribes in the United States are unrecognized. That's data from First Nations Development Institute. A lot of people know that organization. So in regards to that, I partnered with a recognized tribe, and that recognized tribe had to say to the Smithsonian, hey, you can work with this person. So I don't know if there's something that under your university policy, maybe you can like find, I know it's frustrating to have to do that, but trying to find a recognized tribe that you can work with, to partner with, to be able to work with the university to work under NAGPRA. That was an avenue that I used, and I don't know, Shannon might have a better insight on that possibility, but I wanted to share that possibility or solution with you. And I hope that universities recognize that there's unrecognized tribes and somehow put that into their policies and procedures as best as they can too.
And of course, the way the state of California has handled that is that they have a California NAGPRA that recognizes their state recognized nations. So NAGPRA again is the floor, is the baseline that you have to comply with. But states can do more. States can provide more rights in their own state laws, like California has. So that's an opportunity to go to your state legislatures and see if they will support NAGPRA legislation in that way, and in partnership with the federal recognized tribes in your nation. That's always helpful and more efficient a way to work towards that type of solution. But yeah, that's a difficult problem that NAGPRA has, which doesn't seem to be equitable considering that Indigenous bodies have been stolen before there was ever a thing called a federally recognized tribe. So Chelsea, I see your hands raised, and Tony, we haven't forgotten about you. Hoping you can get your thing fixed. All right, Chelsea.
Hi, thank you so much. So going off the last question, I had a question come up. In the process of all these new regulations, is there any part where the Public Law 280 would coincide with that, especially when you talk about specifically California and the state regulations, or does it matter?
I'm sorry, Chelsea, who were you asking the question of?
Oh, I'm asking a question to the facilitator. I know I came in a little late because of the internet. My internet was having some problems, but so I'm not sure exactly to which person specifically to ask the question. So maybe one of you can help me. But it specifically relates to the Public Law 280 and NAGPRA. And is there any any intersection there that has to be addressed?
I don't know that anyone in our panel can answer that question. So a Public Law 280 state means that the state takes over criminal and some civil jurisdiction from tribes, and it's part of federal law. The Public Law 280 and NAGPRA do not meet. They do not touch. NAGPRA is a federal law, and it has precedent and applies to everyone within the United States. Applies to all museums as defined by the law and federal agencies in the U.S., Alaska, and Hawaii. So Public Law 280 is not an issue. It's not a problem. It doesn't apply to this federal law that's applicable to all institutions and federal agencies. Yeah.
Thank you. I thought that might be the answer, but since I'm currently in California and the state of California always has some kind of way to get in, I thought I would ask to make sure.
Good question.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
I guess I did want to jump in and say, as it pertains to unrecognized groups, and we have set the precedent here that we have intentionally reached out to some unrecognized groups, or at least state recognized groups, to try to facilitate some really important returns. So that precedent has already been set here. We are always really happy to collaborate. So please let us know. We're happy to share any information with unrecognized groups as well. And we actually ended up finding the same path to working and collaborating with federally recognized groups as well. So please know that we're very open to that here.
I see that Tony has his question in the chat. He couldn't get his audio to work, but he asks, can you give examples of repatriation that did not go well and an example of a repatriation that did go well?
I guess speaking in very broad brushstrokes, and many of these things I think have happened before my time. I mean, there is an example. I know a very prominent example that Lisa worked with. I don't know, Lisa, if you want to share this one, or if you want me to speak. Yeah, there was one. I think the way NAGPRA had been done was heavily focused on ancestors and funerary belongings for many years. And the idea that we should be deferring to nations and their representatives to determine what might be sacred or cultural patrimony wasn't something that was happening all the time, right? And so I think a case where a sacred belonging was found, it caused some stress and some hand wringing, and there were multiple steps that were asked to be taken before the sacred item could be repatriated. And I think we've learned a lot as an institution from that, and from the experience that Lisa had. We're super grateful to her for providing us with another path to do this, and better understanding the law through these trainings that we've been getting about, how not to do that again. But I think one case that I think is really quite interesting for us is that something that went well is in the very early days of this institution, there were activists who reached out to the curators at Colgate in, I think it was 1976, and said, you have an ancestor on display, that's not appropriate, they should be repatriated. And even pre-NAGPRA, there actually was a repatriation negotiated with Colgate. So I think that set the precedent for having a good tone. We may have faltered in moments along the way, but I think ultimately, we're all about collaboration moving forward, and I think that's a good example of that.
Anything else you all wanted to add to that?
I'll speak. The sacred item is the reason why NAGPRA cases have been opened at Colgate University. And that was my first week there. I found a sacred item, and doing the research that I had, I was able to do, and, with the help of my nation and people that know things about history and everything. And somehow I happened upon these historical documents that the path lined up, and it was actually my family. The sacred item belonged to my family, so I got it repatriated to me. But in order to get that done, it was like pulling teeth. It was like going to battle against the whole university, against everybody that claims, these, I say they claim them as little trophies of colonization. And here's me, Lisa Latosha, with proof saying that it belongs to me and my family. And so I had actual proof from that a lot of times finding historical documents, just a little snippet, like the way we comb through our historical documents. I mean, me and Kelsey are history nerds, so we just love to go and dive into everything. So that was one of the things, is we happened to have the paperwork that proved that it belonged to my family. And it did take us a while. I had to argue with many people to show that this is the law. And thank goodness that I had the support of my nation and my historical preservation officer and the Confederacy itself to make sure that those items were properly returned. And when I told the previous curator that, well, I already told everybody that it's here, and they're like, why would you do that? It makes it sound like we're lying. And I'm like, or it didn't make it sound like we're hiding stuff. And I'm like, well, you kind of are hiding stuff. So that was the original case that opened the doors, the floodgates to Colgate returning everything. So that was personally, that was really hard and challenging. And in order to do this work, sometimes you are by yourself as a Ungwe person, as a First Nations person, and sometimes you do have to be strong, and you have to, you know your laws. And I knew my laws. I knew Taradaho Leon Shenandoah Gaha wrote a paper saying that these particular items were sacred and they needed to go back. And I just happened to have that on me, handed it to her and said, here's our law right here. And so that right there was enough to get things returned. So that was I just wanted to explain that was one of the hard things, one of the rougher returns, but it did end up going in our favor, and our sacred item is home with our family. So that was a good return. So yeah, I'll go for letting me share.
Excellent. All right. Robert, Rosa, would you like to ask your question?
Hi, yes, people were talking about state laws, like here in Florida. I work with the I'm chairman of the American Indian Movement, and I work with Miccosukee and the Seminole. Come across, and especially we got three places that are getting violated at the moment: Brickell, Jupiter, and Anclote. Now, the law 872.5 here gives the property owner rights of objects removed from the ground. NAGPRA does give the Seminole tribe rights to whatever they find around the burial, and the remains itself. But seeing that it's so built up, the issue is here that they're taking everything and just returning the remains. And I've been with Catherine Meir, talking with her on this and trying to collaborate with her in regards to allowing the two federal recognized tribes to go over the items. But like I said, 872 usually is given the property owner custody of all those items. So we're trying to change the law. Does anybody have any input to that? As well as I do speak with William Pestle at MU, and he believes, the laws are unfair, including NAGPRA. How could we go about this, and how could we get these colleges in Florida more involved?
That's a really great question, Robert. And so if I understand it correctly, you're talking about sites or materials or ancestors that are in situ, that are in the ground. Is that correct?
Correct. I'm talking about burial mounds, but what happened here back in the day in Florida was they were taking the midden from the mounds, regardless if there were remains in it or not, and using it for the roadways. So a lot of places, they don't actually know if it was a burial or not, because the whole mound has been gone and destroyed. But then again, there's mounds that have been already desecrated by looters who came and took the remains. And you can even read this in Jonathan Dickinson's book, his diary. I don't know if any of you ever heard of it, but the boatmaster who brings the guy to study this has his whole boat fitted with remains from indigenous tribes. But nonetheless,
yeah. So Robert, let's talk a little bit about what NAGPRA applies to. So our panelists today are talking about the repatriation provisions of NAGPRA, and that's when an institution holds collections, including native bodies, in their institutions, and the process by which they need to consult and repatriate those items back. NAGPRA also applies when ancestors and items are in the ground. However, it only applies to federal and tribal lands. So private lands, state lands, NAGPRA will not apply unless it's part of a federal project or federal funding, and then there may be some sort of NAGPRA tie-in, but normally it's under state law. So let me be clear about NAGPRA, because I'm a lawyer, and I don't normally like any law. Because I see the interests and the sides, and how well-intentioned law can go bad. But I will tell you that I believe in NAGPRA, the act that Congress passed, and I think it only needs a few tweaks to really be the law we need it to be. The problem with NAGPRA has been in the practice of NAGPRA, because you have look at all who's in the room with us today, mostly museum professionals or tribal leaders and officials. Most of you are probably not lawyers trying to interpret a law. And so museums are going to interpret that law from their own background and experience, which is this kind of soft science or archaeology or anthropological kind of background and training. So they want to get it right. They're doing a scientific research project to try to find affiliation, which is not what NAGPRA is about. NAGPRA is a simple administrative law that is trying to return stolen items.
Correct. I'm
right.
aware of that, but if you look onto the site, there's well over 20,000 items that are in between Florida, FSU, USF, and every other one. They have not been repatriated because they have been classified unaffiliated since the historians claim that Seminoles came from the north, and these are not affiliated to them, which, you know, they're not allowing us to tell our stories, as well as the Maya been here and the Taino have also been in Florida. And they refuse to listen to our ancestral knowledge and allow us access to these said remains and items.
Right. So then you are talking about the repatriation provisions of NAGPRA. You're talking about items that are in an institution or federal agency's collections. And many institutions have, instead of doing the work of NAGPRA, they've put their ancestors on those CUI lists. That's why the new NAGPRA regulations are so important. And we hope that they will be finalized and published this year. Because it does away with that classification of culturally unidentifiable ancestors. So the museum will have to do the work to consult and affiliate those ancestors that are currently on CUI lists. So that's been one of the main reasons for the NAGPRA regulation revisions. So we hope to see good work coming from that in the very near future, Robert, and hopefully, and we'll be doing comprehensive NAGPRA training on the new NAGPRA regulations at the repatriation conference in a few weeks from now. There's a couple of questions in our chat, if we could move to that. There's one question that asks, what advice do you have to address key members of leadership, and I'm assuming this is within an institution, who do not think that NAGPRA and repatriation is a human rights issue, and thereby blocking an institution from expeditiously implementing NAGPRA? Any of you in Colgate have any advice?
I guess it depends what your point of departure is, right? I mean, I think you try to work with what you have, and you know, whether it's individuals that you kind of pull aside and see if you can kind of point them in the right direction and try to build coalitions that eventually enter the same room and can help to affect change. I think that's a good way to go. I think that creating reciprocal avenues document is a really helpful tool for kind of showing that. But something else that we've used, and this is more in the classes that we've taught, a recommendation, I think, again, from Lisa, we have used a scene from Reservation Dogs to kind of show the power of ancestors standing behind, what is the character's name? Help me out, people.
Willie Jack.
Willie Jack, thank you. Sorry, guys. Should have had that one on the tip of my tongue. Yeah, we have found that that scene is really powerful for students and for everybody who watches it. And it's kind of a good way of showing, you know, that ancestors aren't just bones, right? They're not just property. They are part of a community. And I think that is the type of tool that has been really helpful in changing hearts and minds.
Yeah.
One of the other tools that we have been using is collecting bad press coverage of other institutions being called out on their lack of NAGPRA and repatriation efforts. So if you can start following NAGPRA on the news and collect your own set of news clippings and show that to your administrators and see if they're willing to stand up to that pressure that being called out what happened to their institution.
That's a really, really good point. And there's been some really strong advocacy internally in institutions with, especially academic institutions, with students, alumni, and faculty, and pooling those resources together to put pressure on an institution's bureaucracy and higher ups, but also know that there's a civil penalty process within NAGPRA. And NAGPRA does have a civil penalty investigator that investigates claims of failing to comply with NAGPRA. And as an insider, you have a special body of knowledge and information that could help get your institution in compliance with NAGPRA. Because one thing, on one hand, it's good. On the other hand, it's not so good. The Secretary of the Interior, her goal with civil penalties is making the institution comply with the law and not necessarily throwing civil penalties at them unless they're really willfully disregarding NAGPRA. So the point is to give the institution the training and the assistance it needs to comply with the law. So I strongly advise you take the position and file a civil penalty complaint. So we're at 3:31 and our time ended at 3:30, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. There were some wonderful questions that are still in chat. We'll make sure that the panelists get all your questions and can respond or reach out to you. We do have folks' contact information from the registration list. I will tell you that the Association on American Indian Affairs, our 9th annual repatriation conference, on November 7th, 8th, and 9th, we will have comprehensive training on the new NAGPRA regulations. We will also be having a full day on various issues within NAGPRA and domestic repatriation. We'll also have a full day on international repatriation. So we've got some really good events and panels coming up at the conference. You're going to see Kelsey and Lisa and Rebecca and Summer there, I hope. And there will be time and space for a lot of networking and socializing and learning more. So I hope you take the opportunity to register and participate in that conference. Let me stop here and see if Kelsey, Rebecca, Lisa, Summer, if you want to have any kind of closing, do you want to make any closing statement?
I just want to say that we'll sure to send Shannon, or if that's the best way, Shannon, to get that out to everybody. And just thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do with NAGPRA, everyone on the screen that works in this, and for the NAICS to work with, and my team, and Shannon and AAIA, and we're really excited to, see everyone either physically at the conference or talk virtually. And please don't hesitate to.
Oh, you're cutting out on us, Kelsey, but we'll make sure everyone has your contact information and can reach out to you about the collections at Colgate or other information that was presented today. So thank you everyone for attending. I want to thank Anna Mati from the University of Denver Museum of Anthropology and the NAGPRA Community of Practice. Put NAGPRA Community of Practice in your Google search bar, look for it, and you can also attend Anne's bi-monthly meetings. If you're a tribal representative, the association has a tribal partners working group, which we've opened up to have this webinar with you today. And that's a closed group of tribal officials and representatives talking about NAGPRA and protecting our cultural heritage, please reach out to us. And we hope to see you at the upcoming repatriation conference. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.